Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. In today's live session, let's have a discussion on certain very important economic events that have taken place from 31st July to 6th of August 2021. Now let's start the discussion. The first article is related to concept of the curbs or restrictions which have been imposed in the bond market by various regulators. Let's understand the basics here so that we can connect it to what is given in the article. Now in case of India, there is a lot of demand for investment in the infrastructure project. In essence, Government of India, for example, has proposed a NIP, National Infrastructure Pipeline. Under NIP, we want to invest more than 100 lakh crore rupees in development of many of these particular infrastructure projects. But out of all these particular investment, a substantial amount of the investment has to come from the private sector. Now, one way of investing on these particular infrastructure projects is basically go to a bank, take a loan. But the problem with respect to these kinds of loans is the banking sector generally has a deposit which has a medium term or a short term maturity, whereas the infrastructure developers want to borrow for a longer tenure or a longer term loans as such. That is the precise reason generally you will come across one problem in the banking sector which is referred to as asset liability mismatch. Now, one way that we can address this particular problem is ensure that the corporate bond market, that is in a sense the overall bond market in case of India is very well developed, or else I'll simply use the term the bond market is mature enough so that these particular developers can simply go to the bond market, issue the bonds and take the loans or basically raise the money in the form of capital for investing in the infrastructure project. Now, all of this looks very rosy or very nice on the paper. There are a lot of issues with respect to corporate bond market in case of India, and this particular article touches one of these particular issues. Now, what are the issues? Let's look at overall issues, then we'll connect it to article here. In case of India, please understand this. The government issues the bonds in the market. Corporate sector or private sector also issues the bonds in the market. We generally use the term penetration. Basically, it measures how much is the total value of the bonds issued by the government sector compared to the value of the bonds issued by the private sector. Generally, in a developed economy such as USA, what you see is when you make a comparison between value of G securities and value of the private sector, that is the bonds here, the bond values issued by the private sector are generally around 1.5 times the value of the bonds issued by the government itself. Right? For example, generally you come across these particular numbers. The value of the bonds to GDP ratio in case of the government, let's say in case of USA, generally is more than 80%. Whereas in case of India, it is somewhere around 41 to 42%. Again, the bonds issued by the government in India divided by GDP value of India. But when you compare this with respect to private sector, in case of USA, this particular ratio is more than 120% when you take the value of the bonds issued by the private sector. And in case of India, it is somewhere around 21%, which essentially means what? In these particular developed economies, the private sector, they are issuing a lot of these particular bonds, more value of the bonds compared to even government. And that is a very good indicator for a simple reason. Government might issue these particular bonds for various reasons. Government in case of India might issue these particular bonds to bridge the deficit, to ensure that there is sufficient amount of money for welfare schemes and to invest in, let's say, infrastructure project also. But when you talk about the private sector issuing bonds and raising money, please understand they want to raise the money so that they can invest, they can produce more, they can create more employment, etc. That is the importance of looking at the penetration ratio. Right? Generally, they will say in case of a USA, penetration is around 1.5 times or 150%, and in case of India, it is around 50%, which essentially means most of the bonds issued in case of Indian market, that is within the bond market or the debt market, most of these particular debt instruments issued are from the government itself, both the central government as well as the state government. Now, in addition to this, there are more issues in the bond market. For example, experts will tell you that we do not have sufficient number of a diversity of bonds in India. different types of bonds are not sold in India compared to, let's say, Western markets. However, in recent times, yes, we have started issuing newer bonds such as masala bonds. Also, although I am using masala bonds here, please understand, masala bonds are issued in an offshore market, not in the Indian market. We also have green bonds in India. We have additional tier 1 bonds. So, newer types of bonds, yes, right, they are being issued in the recent times only. In addition to this, whenever government borrowing increases, there will definitely be an impact which has been proven by various surveys on the bonds which are issued by the private sector. What is the basic idea here? When government debt increases, generally government borrows heavily from the bond market, and when government borrows heavily from the bond market, the issue of the bonds increases, the coupon rate will get affected. Interest rates in the market will start rising upwards because government is borrowing heavily from the market. And this will basically crowd out the private sector borrowings which they can do in the form of a bond. So there are many issues. In addition to this, the one issue which is discussed in this particular article is the imposition or the restrictions which are imposed by the regulators themselves in terms of investing in the corporate bond market. For example, there are pension fund companies in India. Okay, there are insurance funds, there are pension funds. The regulator for pension funds is PFRDA, Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. Now imagine you are running a pension fund company, you have collected lot of money, I will call this as a corpus. You are not allowed to invest more than 5% of this particular corpus in a bond market, that is corporate bond market. This is a restriction which has been imposed right by this particular authority, right, in this particular scenario. And when I say corporate bond market, I am specifically referring to the concept of infrastructure investment trust here. And not just this, the PFRDA says that this particular infrastructure investment trust should have a very good credit rating. The sponsors of this particular infrastructure investment trust should have a very good credit rating. Generally, they will say that it should have a credit rating of a AA or AA plus. But various experts will tell you that, or even in the article it is mentioned that whenever these kinds of a trust are set up in an initial phase where they actually require money, the rating will not be anywhere above BB. And I just hope that you know the concept of a credit rating. AAA will be the highest, and right, it will keep on declining like this, AA, A, BBB, B, like this. So these particular infrastructure investment trusts which are set up initially, in the initial phases where they actually require funding, these will not have a very good credit rating, nothing more than BB. Now how can we increase this particular credit rating? There is a possibility. There is a concept called as partial credit enhancement, PCE. Right? There is a scheme even introduced by the government also. RBI also allows partial credit enhancement. Now what do you mean by partial credit enhancement? Imagine I am one of the companies which is issuing a bond in the market. Is it okay? Debt instrument in the market. Now when I am issuing a debt instrument in the market, I will have to guarantee the coupon rate or the interest rate to the investor, assuming you are the investor. Now what if I incur a loss? I am unable to repay or pay back the principal or the coupon rate. In such scenarios, generally under partial credit enhancement, 20% of the losses in these particular debt instruments will be covered by the bank which is providing this particular facility. I repeat, in partial credit enhancement, the restriction for a bank is 20%. 20% of the losses because of these particular debt instruments can be satisfied, can be paid up by these particular banks. This is called as a partial credit enhancement. Now the argument is whenever partial credit enhancement increases, basically somebody else guarantees your money, in that particular scenario credit rating will increase. But the argument put forward by various experts is you want to increase the credit rating, let's say from BB to AA plus, so that these particular pension funds will invest in this. For that to happen, you should have a partial credit enhancement of 50%, at least 50%. But what is the limit per bank? How much they can provide the PCE? Only 20% as per the regulation of RBI. So the experts say that if you want to have 50% partial credit enhancement, then there should be 3 banks which will provide this particular PCE to, right, this particular debt instrument. and it is very difficult to get 3 banks to provide partial credit enhancement to only one debt instrument. That is another issue, right? Next issue, please understand this. Whenever you talk about liquidity adjustment facility within the banking sector, it is one of the measures which is used by RBI to adjust the liquidity in the banking sector. The tools which are used are repo, reverse repo, MSF, etc. But whenever you talk about repo or reverse repo for that matter, the G securities which are issued, which are issued by the government can be used as a collateral, can be used as a security to pledge, or can be used basically to enter into repo operations. But this particular article says that there is a problem with respect to corporate bond here also. That is, if there is a corporate bond which is owned by, let's say, someone else in the market, and they want to enter into a repo transaction. Now here is a pointer. Repo is a very common term. Please do not misunderstand the concept of a repo, assuming that it is only applicable to RBI and bank. Repo is a very common concept. Wherever agreements are entered into two parties related to assets, there is a concept of a repo there. So please do not understand that repo is only in regards to RBI and banking sector. No. So idea is within these particular repo transactions, corporate bonds cannot be used for entering into these kinds of agreements. So there is a problem with respect to corporate bond market. We need to promote corporate bond market, and this article says that Government of India as well as RBI should look into this. Now what can be done in order to promote these particular corporate bond markets? One, we will have to ensure that more and more diversified instruments are issued in case of India, so that the corporates or the developers will go to the bond market, issue these particular bonds, borrow for a longer duration. The pressure on the banking sector to lend for these particular projects will come down. First. Second one, RBI can look into enhancing this particular partial credit enhancement, can promote it much further so that the credit rating will improve. Third one, understand this, in terms of basically promoting these particular corporate bonds, what Government of India has already done is, has basically promoted setting up of multiple platforms. And one initiative that was actually announced by the Government of India, which has not yet taken off, is a concept of Credit Guarantee Enhancement Corporation, CGEC, Credit Guarantee Enhancement Corporation. Now what is the concept here? This was announced in 2018 and 2019 budget. Government of India basically stated, we are going to set up a corporation, and this particular authority will help in promoting or improving the credit rating of the borrowers, especially corporate bond issuers in the market. But this particular authority so far has not been set up by Government of India. Again, Government of India can look into setting up of this particular authority. So these are some of the very important points in relation to this particular article. Again, in article, all of this information is not provided, but from the UPSC exams perspective, corporate bond market is important. You are expected to know these particular points. Done? Now, based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. Increased debt of government may crowd out, underline the term may here, may crowd out private sector borrowings using bonds. Statement is true. Again, I have underlined the term may here. Yes, when government borrows heavily by issuing bonds, it will definitely have an upward push in the interest rates in the market. The private sector will not be happy with that. They may simply move away from this particular market, which is called as a crowding out effect. Second, the first issue of masala bonds was done by Yes Bank. Please understand, statement is a false. It's a factual based statement. The first issue of a masala bonds was done by IFC, International Finance Corporation, which is one of the arm of the World Bank. With respect to Yes Bank, right, in what context it is known? Again, connecting to bonds. Earlier I used the term green bonds. The first tranche of green bonds in case of India were issued by Yes Bank as well as Exim Bank. Remember that particular piece of nugget. So based on this particular analysis, option A, only first statement is true, is the right option. Let me go to the next article. FTP aims to increase the exports to $1 trillion by financial 26. Now let's basically break up these particular terms. First, what is FTP? FTP stands for Foreign Trade Policy. Once every 5 years, government will basically come out with a trade policy under which various targets are set up, various schemes are introduced, various policy measures are taken, all of them only to achieve promotion of exports. We had a policy from 2009 to 14. We have a policy from 2015 to 20. I am using the term have for a simple reason. The policy should have ended in 2020, 31st March 2020. Because of the pandemic, Government of India extended the application of this particular policy. And as per the latest information, the new FTP, right, foreign trade policy, will come effective from 1st October 2021. Again, it is just right a piece of news. Whether it is going to be implemented midway in a financial year or government will decide let's go to the next financial year, you will have to wait and see. But anyways, what is important here? Under this particular foreign trade policy 2015 to 2020, which has been extended, Government of India had set up a target of a promotion of $900 billion exports annually. Is it okay? We had a set up target of $900 billion worth of exports annually. Have we achieved this? Right? Absolutely no. We have not been able to achieve or reach this particular target of $900 billion annually. The highest we have been able to achieve has been around $538 billion in the year 18 and 19. And for majority period of the times in the last 9 years, the value of the exports which have been done from India to rest of the world have been in the range of around $280 billion to $330 billion. Now the argument which has been put forward here is, for this particular financial year, that is 2022, Government of India set up a target of a promotion of $400 billion worth of exports. And already 1/3 of this has been achieved in the first 3 months itself. So Government of India is very hopeful of achieving this particular target of $400 billion in financial year 22 and basically expanding this to $1 trillion by 2026, which is supposed to be the period for the next foreign trade policy. Now various experts have pointed out that ambitious target, this is an ambitious target for a simple reason. If I move from right this particular level of, let's say, right the 400 billion, right, around 400 billion to, let's say, $1 trillion in this particular time period, the compounded annual growth rate that the exports will have to achieve is around 15%. But if you see what has been the compounded annual growth rate, that is CAGR, for the 5-year duration 2015 to 2020, it has not been more than 5%. So for last 5 years, forgetting the pandemic period, the growth rate, right, the compounded annual growth rate in case of exports has been around 5%. And now we want to achieve $1 trillion with a compounded annual growth rate of 15%. Right? There are certain questions or the concerns raised with respect to this particular target. Government of India says we are hopeful because of certain things that are happening in the economy. What are the things? One, the commodity prices in the international market are increasing. Is it okay? Commodity prices. Best example, the steel prices. Now, what is the importance of the commodity prices? Please understand, commodities, for example, steel is a very important raw material. And whenever the demand for steel increases, it essentially means that there is a lot of industrial activity that is taking place. And when there is a lot of industrial activity, this is generally connected to higher production, higher growth rate, etc. So, one, commodity prices are increasing, right? We are hopeful that this will help us out. Second, the total global demand is also increasing, and we want to basically satisfy some of this particular demand by exporting more and more. And the third reason that has been provided by the government is the PLI scheme, production linked incentive scheme, is expected to provide benefits and improve the production that is basically manufacturing in the domestic market. So because of these particular three reasons, right, we are hopeful of achieving this particular target of $1 trillion worth of exports by 2026. However, please understand there are certain structural issues also that government needs to address in order to achieve this particular target. What are the structural issues? One, Government of India needs to enter into multiple trading agreements with other countries. Because please understand, until last year there was this particular discussion that we would be part of RCEP, which was supposed to have 16 members. Ultimately we said we do not want to be part of RCEP. And that was a very important group or a block as such for the sheer size of the the potential market that would be getting access to. Now we have decided no, we won't be part of it, but that doesn't mean that, right, nothing else can be done by the government. We can enter into agreements with other countries, such as we are holding FTAs with, that is a free trade agreement negotiations with the UK, we are holding that with European Union, we are also conducting that with even bilateral agreement with the USA. So more and more agreements, trade agreements should be entered into by the government in order to basically provide more market for India's exports. Second, there are certain issues with respect to taxation. For example, whenever we are talking about exports, we talk about embedded taxes. Yes, Government of India has implemented RODTEP, ROSCTL in order to provide the remission of embedded taxes, but the RODTEP scheme, the rates have not yet been notified. So these particular rates should be notified, which will give certain clarity to the exporters as to what price they should, at what price they should sell these particular exports in the international market. Right, so these are some of the structural issues. Now, one more point, I just forgot to tell you one more point, the issue of logistics. You cannot basically finish the discussion on exports without talking about logistics in India. Please understand, logistics is a very important part and parcel which contributes to what is the final price of the product in the market. In case of India, one of the reasons Indian exports are not very competitive, underline the term, are not very competitive in the international market is because of cost of logistics, right. The cost of logistics in case of India is around 13% of GDP, whereas in case of other developed economies, if you see that, it is generally in a lower single digit number in the range of, let's say, 6% or 8% like this. That is a precise reason. Very recently there has been a lot of discussion within the government, and there is an expectation that government will come out with a logistics draft under which they want to reduce this particular cost of logistics from 13% to 8%, so that the cost of logistics will come down, the cost which will get added to the market or selling price will come down, the domestic goods, right, comparatively will become cheaper, and even our exports, the cost will obviously become lower and exports will become very, very competitive in the international market. So these are some of the points in regards to this particular article of the new foreign trade policy. Next article, Insolvency Code. Now I know that in the last couple of weeks we have already discussed certain points related to Insolvency Code, but why I have picked up this particular article for this week? Very recently a parliamentary panel has given a report, a very critical report with respect to performance of this particular Insolvency Code. And because I have already mentioned in the earlier videos also, we have completed 5 years of IBC, there could be a critical evaluation question in the UPSC mains or even in the prelims, factual based questions could be asked on this. That is the precise reason I have picked up this particular article. Now, lot of points are given, but most of them are not mentioned in the article. Let's discuss them one by one. Now, to understand what recommendations or what observations have been provided, first you need to quickly have a look at how the process actually works. I'll put it in a nutshell here. Have a look at this. First, the company will approach, either the company or the lender will approach NCLT. Then, insolvency professional is appointed. Committee of creditors is formed. Then, the order is basically, that is the decision of committee of creditors is sent to NCLT and NCLT shall issue order. This in a nutshell is the IBC process or insolvency resolution process. Now, what are the critical points which have been raised by this particular panel? Note them or please remember them one by one. First one, whenever the case goes to NCLT, imagine I am a creditor, I will approach NCLT to file an application. The time period taken by the NCLT is higher. As per the law, it should take around 14 days, and various surveys have already found out that it takes more than 130 days actually to accept the application. First particular point. Second important point, the total membership within NCLT which has been approved is 62. Is it okay? Within NCLT, the total number of members who should be present is 62, so that they would hear more and more cases. But this particular committee says that NCLT is working without a president, first point, and second, it is falling short of 34 members, which essentially means there are infrastructure problems within NCLT. Second point, here is the insolvency professional. this parliamentary panel basically raises a concern that new graduates are being hired for conducting insolvency resolution process. They do not have the expertise. Basically, you are hiring them to conduct this particular process. So, a concern with respect to quality of insolvency professionals has been raised. And in addition to this, the panel says a new institution for insolvency professionals must be set up, National Institution for Insolvency Professionals. Next step, Committee of Creditors. Have a look at this Committee of Creditors. Generally, the Committee of Creditors will decide, and basically they will come to a decision whether we should liquidate the company or we should sell off. That is, insolvency resolution has to be provided. This committee says that the number of cases which are pending in the IBC are very high, and second, the haircut, that is basically how much is retrieved by these particular Committee of Creditors, is very low. The committee or the panel says that the recovery rates within this particular IBC is around 39%, and in certain cases the haircut, that is basically how much of the debt has been given up, is around 95%, and that is a very poor record. You will have to improve upon this. That is the observation of the parliamentary panel. In addition to this, right now what is the process? The buyer has to be, the bidder has to be a single buyer. For example, imagine my company is under IBC, you individually can bid and purchase this particular company. Now this particular panel says, why don't we go for a newer mechanism, right, wherein there is a flexibility provided, rather than single person or single company bidding for this particular company to buy. Why don't we provide a flexibility wherein 3 or 4 buyers will come together and buy out this particular company? That is one recommendation. And second recommendation is, have a look at this, it has basically asked to set up a framework to basically say that what measures or what parameters should be considered by the Committee of Creditors before accepting certain haircut. Done. In addition to this, there is a concept of the pre-pack insolvency. Pre-pack insolvency, it is available for MSMEs right now. This panel says that we should also introduce a pre-pack insolvency for larger companies, so that the insolvency resolution process will be shortened and the process will be completed much faster. And understand this, finally, with respect to NCLT itself, the panel says that NCLT in many cases has given judgments or has issued orders which have been challenged at NCLAT, National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, and even at Supreme Court level, and at either of these particular levels the judgments of NCLT have been reversed, which essentially means that there are certain questions with respect to quality of the judgments which are issued at NCLT. So these are some of the very important critical points which have been raised by this particular parliamentary panel. Now this is one side of the argument. Can you simply write this much and leave it? Please don't do that. What should be the other side of the argument? How should you support IBC? Please understand this. Very recently, after announcement of the monetary policy itself, RBI governor came in defense of IBC. RBI governor said that yes, the recovery rates are somewhere in the range of 39% to 40%. We agree to that. But even this particular recovery rate is much better than what we had in the earlier situation. That is, before IBC, we had individually approaching DRTs, banks approaching debt recovery tribunals. We had Lok Adalats, is it okay? And we had SURFACE. These are some of the measures under which recovery was done. And RBI governor states that in case of a Lok Adalat, the recovery rate was 5%. In case of a DRT, it was 6%. Under SURFACE, it went up to 20%. And compare these particular recoveries with the recovery under the IBC now. It is around 39%. It is a much better improvement. That is the first one. Second one, implementing a scheme such as IBC has basically promoted the performance of India under the ease of doing business. Third important point in support of IBC, earlier when these particular insolvency resolution mechanisms were used, on an average it took 4.3 years for insolvency resolution process to be conducted. Now, right, yes, on an average it is taking more than 270 days, which is mandated, but it is definitely much lower than the earlier average of 4.3 years. So these are some of the points in relation to this particular article, right. If you have followed the discussion so far, I have given you a critical evaluation, right. Please write these kinds of points whenever a critical evaluation is asked by UPSC. Please do not write only critical points or the supporting points. You will have to have a match of both of these particular points as such. Done? Next, another scheme, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Right? Now, please understand there is a lot of discussion with respect to employment, unemployment, skilling in case of India. Now, one problem that we generally face with respect to providing employment in case of India is that the labor force or the workforce doesn't have sufficient skill sets, right? Either they are partially skilled, unskilled, or right, they have the skills which are not actually required in the market, or they have the skills but they don't have any kind of a certification. So, in order to address these kinds of issues, Government of India in 2015 launched Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Under this particular PMKVY, in the first year 2015 and 2016, we implemented PMKVY 1.0. Then from 16 to 20, we implemented PMKVY 2.0, and very recently, right, from 2021, which has been further extended to 22 also, we have implemented Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana 3.0. But please understand, there has been a structural shift with respect to how we are going to skill the people. I will come back to that later. But what are the basic components within this particular PMKVY? Again, the basic reason I am going to the background point is, have a look at it. When did we implement this particular scheme? 15-16. We have completed 5 years. Please be very, very careful. So, what are the basic components under this? There are two very important components in the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. The two components are, one, we are going to have a short-term training. I will use the short forms now. Short-term training. Under short-term training, basically, we will take the youth, provide orientation, skill them, and certify, also place them. Is it okay? Right? Orientation, skilling, that is basically training, then certification, and then placement. And in addition to STT, there is also component, right, such as RPL. These are the two components. What is RPL? Recognition of prior learning. Means what? I have certain skill sets which I have already acquired, but I do not have a certification. So, under this particular PMKVY, I will undergo orientation and then I will be certified with respect to the skill sets I already have. And one important difference between STT and RPL is, STT has a component of placement. Remember this, STT has a component of placement. RPL does not have a component of placement. Okay. Now, under STT, Government of India had set up certain target, and the same thing with respect to RPL also. Now, with respect to STT, what was the target set up? Government basically said, we want to achieve a target of training 7.6 million youth. And as per this particular article, out of the target of 7.6, we have been able to train 6.5 million youth. This is not a very big news. Bigger news is, we have been able to place only 2.3 million youth who have been trained under this particular scheme. Is it okay? I will repeat it again. Under STT, we wanted to train how many, or we wanted to ensure how many youth will be skilled? 7.6 million. How much have we achieved? 6.5 million. But how many are placed? Only 2.3 million, which essentially means government wanted to have 70% of the placements. Remember this was one more target. Within this, government wanted to achieve 70% placement target, and they have not been able to meet it. And in terms of RPL, recognition of prior learning, the data basically says that the target, right, basically to provide the certification was 6.39 million people, against which, right, basically we have been able to overshoot this particular target. Again, for UPSC exams, you don't have to mug up these numbers. If you can remember 70%, there are two components, STT and RPL, that should be more than sufficient. Now, what are the issues apart from this, right? In essence, government wanted to achieve the targets in one component. Yes, they have achieved, right? That is RPL, they have overachieved it. But under STT, right, they have not been able to meet the target. They wanted to achieve 70% placement target under STT, that also has not happened. But beyond this, what else is given? Right, there are certain states which have been able to do well compared to what is the national average in terms of training their youth or skilling their youth. And there are certain other states which are performing very, very poor. These particular states will have to pick up the work in terms of training their youth. That is one point. Second point, understand the reason why the employment or the placement target is becoming difficult to achieve is because of the pandemic, or before that there was a slowdown, then there was a pandemic, and this has created certain uncertainty with respect to the job market in India, as a result of which these particular targets have not been able, the scheme has not been able to meet these particular targets. So these are some of the points in terms of Pradhana Mantri, right, the Kaushalya Vikas Yojana. Next article related to LTRR. Now understand this particular article has appeared even before the monetary policy was announced. So just understand the concept, that should be more than sufficient. Now in the last couple of quarters, what we have seen is RBI is basically following an accommodative monetary policy, which essentially means what? The money supply in the market is very, very high. But please understand, when you have a higher money supply like this, generally what happens? Banking sector sits with a lot of surplus funds. Bank has a lot of surplus funds. Now someone will say, sir, when bank has funds, why are they not giving into, let's say, industries? There is a risk involved, right? Because of the pandemic, there is volatility, uncertainty which has created. So RBI itself says that banks are sitting with surplus money like this. The demand for the credit has become muted. In a sense, there is a very low demand for loans in the market, right? In this particular situation, it doesn't look good when you see that inflation rate is increasing, money supply is very, very high, and there is a lower demand for the credit, right? In order to address this, right, so that there is a withdrawal of money supply for a longer duration. Understand the statement here. In order to address these particular issues, what are the issues? Muted demand for credit, higher money with the banking sector, and inflation rate being high. Can you allow all the three to continue like this? No. If the money supply is high and inflation rate is already high, you are basically fueling the inflation rate. So for a longer duration, for a sustained time period, RBI has to take out the liquidity from this particular market as such. Now generally you will come across the concept of a repo and a reverse repo. Is it okay? These are the most important tools which are used by RBI. But the problem that RBI says with respect to using repo in this particular instance is, repo, basically you can enter into repo contract or repo agreement for overnight purposes. Or another one is a term repo. Term repo generally is for 7 days. Is it okay? So term repo again generally, right, it could be for 21 days also, but generally RBI uses for 7 days. You can go for an overnight repo or a 7-day term repo. The problem with respect to using repo to attract the liquidity, to absorb the liquidity, right, or let's say reverse repo to absorb the liquidity in this particular instance will be that this liquidity will not be absorbed from the market for a longer duration, right, but we are following an accommodative monetary policy stance. We want to take out this excess liquidity for more or longer period of time. That is the precise reason. Last year, right, basically in 2020, RBI introduced a revised liquidity management framework. Revised liquidity management framework. Under this, basically they are using a tool which is which goes by the name of long-term variable rate reverse repo. Is it okay? Long-term variable rate reverse repo. Again, don't get confused, right? Not the term looks very technical. Concept is very simple. I said that in case of a repo or reverse repo, right, what is the duration, right, overnight or 7 day, right? In case of 7 day, RBI simply uses the term repo. Now in case of long term variable rate reverse repo, basically banks entering into repo transactions or repo agreements with RBI to basically transfer certain assets. These are basically entered for a duration of 14 days. Is it okay? These are entered into, right, these kinds of contracts or agreements are entered into for a duration of 14 days. That is a specialty about LTRR. So RBI says we might use this particular LTRR wherein we will take out the surplus liquidity or surplus funds which are there with the banking sector for a longer duration, right? Because under reverse repo 1 day or 7 day, but under LTRR I can absorb this particular excess liquidity for a longer duration, that is, let's say 14 days. So RBI said we might use this particular LTRR to absorb excess liquidity from the market. Banks are not happy with this. Banks are not enthused with respect to the usage of LTRR. What is the reason? Banks are saying, okay, we will park these particular funds, let's say for 14 days with RBI, but what if there is a sudden rise in the demand for credit in the market? Is it okay? If there is a sudden rise in the demand for credit in the market, again I will have to run back to RBI, try to borrow under the repo rate or other tools which are there with RBI. Right? We don't want to do that, right? We do not want to enter into emergency situation like that. So this is the gist of the article which has been provided in the context of RBI proposing to use LTRR tool. Next, states non-tax revenues. Now let me put forward a question to you. What if UPSC will ask you this kind of a descriptive question? UPSC says, in the current fiscal stress in the overall economy, it is very pertinent or it is very important for the states to improve their non-tax revenues or to improve the collection of their non-tax revenues. Right? Again, this kind of a question, can it be asked in UPSC? Definitely yes. Right? It is a kind of a question which generally UPSC reserves for mains as such. Now, what is the basic idea here? Please understand this. Whenever I talk about the state government, because most of the times when you talk about the finances, focus is always on the central government or the union government. But in this case, I am focused on the state government here. Have a look at this. When you talk about the state government, right, what are the different sources of revenues for the state government? Because obviously just like central government, state government also spends money. It also incurs expenditure. It also provides social welfare schemes. So what are the different sources from which state government will get the money from? Right, one, we have transfers from the central government. Best example for this is Finance Commission. As per 15th Finance Commission, more than 50 lakh crore rupees, right, because of the central divisible pool, because of various grants, state specific grants, more than 50 lakh crore rupees will be transferred between 21 to 26 to the states, but that is for a period of 5 years. Done. In addition to this, the states also get GST compensation. Is it okay? States also get GST compensation. States also implement certain other types of taxes, indirect taxes, and collect a certain amount of revenue. Best example, sales tax on petrol and diesel. And there are other non-tax revenues. Is it okay? In addition to all of these, there are other non-tax revenues, and this article discusses this component of the revenues collected by the state government. Now follow the discussion very carefully here. In recent times, what has happened is, the issue with respect to GST has started cropping up, right? We have implemented GST for a longer duration now, but the compensation period under GST is going to be over in July 2022. And once the compensation period is over, definitely yes, states may not be able to get, assuming there is no extension of the compensation period, states may not be able to get any amount of a GST compensation from the central government. Now, as such, because of the pandemic, the finances of the states are already under a lot of stress. Now, even if the compensation cess will not be given to the state government, further stress will be put on these particular finances of the state government. Now, in this particular context, what is the role of the non-tax revenues? The article says that when you take into consideration the overall revenues collected by the state government, the non-tax revenues account for 10% of the overall revenues. And within this particular 10% of these particular non-tax revenues, majority of it, that is around 80% of these particular non-tax revenues actually come from providing general services, social and fiscal services, and economic services. Right? There are various types of services which are provided by the state governments on which charges are imposed, levies are imposed, and the state government will collect the money from. Now, this particular article says that state government, in order to protect its finances, in order to promote its finances, has to focus on the non-tax revenues in the coming days. Now, one problem with respect to promotion of a non-tax revenues is, please understand, just like we have a finance commission at the central government level, there should also be a finance commission at the state level. Is it okay? Understand this very carefully. Just like we have a finance commission at the central government level, there should also be a finance commission at the state government level. In case of a central government or the union government, which will set up the finance commission, the authority is given under Article 280. Although I am saying union government, right, technically we will say President of India shall set up or shall constitute the finance commission at the central level. But at the state level, this particular power has been given to governor under Article 243. Is it okay? Under Article 243, the governor of a particular state shall constitute this particular finance commission. And what is the importance of the finance commission at the state level? It will basically tell the state governments where are the issues with respect to collection of revenues, distribution of taxes between the state government as well as the municipalities, and even the third tier of the government. Right? These are very important roles which are generally played by the finance commissions at the state level. Now the problem here is, although there is an article related to finance commission at the state level, states have not been setting up these particular finance commission. And this is important for a simple reason. When you look at terms of references of a central finance commission, I am talking about central finance commission. When you look at the terms of references of central finance commission, or let us say simply finance commission, one of the TORs basically mandates that the finance commission should also give recommendations as to how we can increase the consolidated fund of the states. Is it okay? Right? It has to give a recommendation how to increase the consolidated fund of the states. And these recommendations are basically provided looking into the recommendations which are provided by the state finance commissions. And the 15th finance commission says that since states have not been able to set up their own finance commission, I will not be able to give you these kinds of recommendations. Now, in addition to this, another important problem with respect to state finance commission is this. Have a look at this. These particular finance commissions are not permanent in nature. Okay, so whenever any state sets up a finance commission, the finance commission has to get a space, the real estate space as such, has to get the office equipments, has to get the manpower, has to get the reports from all the departments concerned, and this will take a lot of time as well as incur a lot of expenses. And that is a precise reason whenever you talk about the state finance commissions, the time period which is taken by them to give the report is also very lengthy. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised with respect to the state finance commissions, which may basically add or which may basically enhance the non-tax revenues which are collected by the state governments in the current situation of the financial stress. So these are some of the important points given in this particular article. Now based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. Under Article 280, Finance Commission is constituted at central as well as the state level. Statement is wrong. 280 central, 243 state level. The Finance Commission at central and state level are constituted by President of India. Even this statement is wrong. Central Finance Commission set up by or constituted by President of India, state by the governor. Okay. So based on this, right option is option D, neither 1 nor 2. Now certain important points from the PIB, Press Information Bureau. First, a lot of discussions happening with respect to this particular bill, right? Although coverage was not provided in these newspapers, AERA bill, AERA, Airport Economic Regulatory Authority bill. Now understand certain important points here. In case of India, with respect to managing, basically running these particular airports, we have Airport Authority of India. Is it okay? AAI, Airport Authority of India. Now what if this particular airport is not run by AAI and it has been given to a private sector, right? Basically under PPP. So whenever you have either Airport Authority of India or a private sector entity running these particular airports, right, managing these particular airports, they will impose certain charges on anybody who uses the infrastructure within the airport. For example, user charges are there, right? If you have travelled by air, in addition to airfare, there is also a component of a user charges. And if there is any company which is operating, let's say airstrip, which is parking in this particular area, again they are going to impose certain charges for providing these aeronautical services. Earlier, it was the Airport Authority of India which used to decide these particular tariffs. But various committees pointed out that on one side, Airport Authority of India manages the airports, fixes the tariffs, and on the other hand, it is a regulator for the tariff fixation. There is a conflict of interest here. That is a precise reason in the year 2008, Government of India passed Airport Economic Regulatory Authority Act, and under this we set up this particular AERA authority or simply AERA. And the role of AERA was basically regulate how the tariffs are fixed in these particular airports, and that is important for a simple reason. Understand this, in most of the cities where the airports are available in India, these generally act as monopolies. That is, these are the only airports which are available for us to travel from point A to point B. Now, if these are monopolies, is there a risk that these particular developers will overcharge us? And because we do not have any alternative, right, we will have to pay more charges for traveling or by using these particular services. So, ERA was set up to regulate how the tariffs are decided. Now, what has been proposed under this particular bill? Understand two very important provisions. Under this particular bill, there is a concept called as a major airport. Okay, under this particular bill, there is a concept called as major airport. How do you define major airport? Any airport which handles 3.5 million passengers. Is it okay? Any airport which handles 3.5 million. I am using 3.5 million, newspapers might simply say 35 lakh, both are one and the same. So, 3.5 million passengers handled by this particular airport, it is called as a major airport. And in recent times, what has happened is, when government wants to open up the private sector participation in the development of these particular airports, these private sector entities are more focused on these particular major airports because obviously traffic is higher. So, government wants to club this particular major airport concept into non-major airports. That is, in simple terms, henceforth whenever government will open up the bids for private sector participation in, let us say, airport management, it will club major airports as well as non-major airports and sell them in a bulk like this. Right? That is a very important change that has been proposed under the concept of Airport Economic Regulatory Authority Bill. Okay. Next one, Pehchan Initiative. Right? Not very new, but recently was there in the newspaper. In the parliamentary discussion, the minister basically stated that a total of 26.79 lakh artisans have been registered under this particular initiative. Now, the question crops up, sir, what is this particular initiative? This particular initiative was launched in 2016 by Ministry of Textiles. Under this particular initiative, basically we are going to identify the artisans and we are going to ask them to be registered under this particular Pehchan initiative. And once you are registered, ID card will be issued in the name of this particular artisan. There is a scheme, right, basically extension of this Pehchan card scheme, and this particular card will carry the name of the artisan, that is the worker, address, the telephone number and Aadhaar number also. And not just this, right, this particular card will also be integrated with Aadhaar network with the bank account, so that any entitlement which is supposed to be provided to this artisan will be transferred directly into the bank account. Done. And these are certain very important points with respect to Pehchan initiative. And if you are a card holder, Pehchan ID card holder, your family, right, some of the members of your family can also get treatment at ESI hospitals, other dispensaries as such. You can get access to loans generally in the range of 4 to 5%, right. So, these are some of the advantages that government provides to these particular artisans under Pehchan initiative. Next, Sankalp program. Okay, Sankalp program. Basically, it is a World Bank aided program. Remember this. This is a World Bank aided program related to skilling. And anything related to skilling in case of India is implemented by NSDC, right, under the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. Now, basically under this particular Sankalp program, we want to strengthen the infrastructure, right, at the district level, at the central level, at the state level, the skilling infrastructure should be strengthened. And very recently it has been announced that this particular scheme or the program will be run till 2023. Is it okay? So, these are some of the very important points which are mentioned in the PIB during this particular time period, and these were not discussed in the newspaper. That is the precise reason I have picked up these particular 3 articles here. So, that is it from my side with respect to the articles for this particular time period. If you like an initiative, please hit the like button and provide your valuable inputs in the comment section below. And if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please consider subscribing to BYJU'S IAS channel. Thank you. Have a good day.